Hello, nerds for Yang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, is and true. Come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds.
Okay. Hello, nerds.
Oh my God, we have Daniel Negreanu, Kid Poker himself, on Nerds for Yang. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
I'm happy to be here. Being a nerd is cool. I've been a nerd my whole life. I love it.
Dude, I had a feeling there was a little nerd DNA in you. You can't be that good at poker and not have some nerdiness in you.
No, I actually enjoyed math class.
There
that
you
was
go.
Fun for me. I saw that as fun. Yeah.
You picked the right candidate to support, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
right?
We were just chatting briefly before we went live, and to be fair, I started a little bit on the down note. I was like, man, I wish I was talking to you under better circumstances. And you have a different view.
Yeah.
Like, you're not on the ledge, ready to take a leap.
No, absolutely not. As you know, tomorrow night, Andrew Yang is coming here to Las Vegas. I'll be hosting an event for him here along with Steve Aoki. And really, I see this as the beginning, just the beginning of the Yang Game movement, right? It's not over today. He's a math guy, right? So what do you expect? He's looking at the numbers. He saw New Hampshire didn't go quite as well as we would have liked, and Ohio as well. So it makes sense from a math perspective. We'd expect nothing less for him to suspend the campaign for now, right? And the good news is he has become, in a short period of time, a very coveted asset in the Democratic Party. Whether you're watching CNN and listening to Van Jones and them talk about him, or even on Fox News, Tucker Carlson saying, positive things about Yang. Unanimously, this is a guy that's going to be coveted down the stretch. Whether that looks like a Yang 2024 or Yang being a prominent member of in the cabinet in some fashion, his message will not die with the announcement yesterday.
I totally agree. I mean, I guess I hate to do this with you since this is your life, and I usually throw out poker analogies at work, but with non-poker players, so I don't feel as nervous. But for you, I would say, in a way, he started out with a pretty good hand, but sometimes you look at it and you even have to muck a hand that you like initially, and that doesn't mean you lose the whole game or the whole night or the tournament.
Yeah, no, a smart leader is someone who has a vision and a plan, which he did. But then as, new information comes in, you go, okay, well, let's take a look at the plan again. All right. Yeah. The path we were on is no longer viable. So we're going to make a shift, which any good poker player does. Like, you get pocket aces, and you think, wow, but then the board runs out really ugly for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to change course. And, what looked like maybe what was promising for a moment is shifting into something new.
So what was tell me, let's zoom out a little bit, Daniel. I seem to think, did you grow up in Canada, or where's your story begin?
Yeah, no, I grew up in Toronto, Canada. So I'm very familiar with sort of a different style of government, if you will. Right. And I've lived here in the United States in Las Vegas for the last 20 years or so.
Right on. And so now you're a U.S. citizen, or you're just someone who cares deeply about America?
No, I did get my citizenship in March of 2016 because I wanted to do my part in voting against, Mr. Trump. It worked here in Nevada, but unfortunately, across the country, it wasn't quite enough to make a difference.
Now, that's interesting. Toronto also has its own interesting political history with mayoral leadership and whatnot. So
yes, you do.
you've seen interesting stuff from your old hometown and now in your new home country. Let me ask you this, Daniel. How did you first come across Yang? Was he the first person you were thinking about, or were you considering other candidates beforehand? How did you end up in the Yang Gang?
Well, I've always been, sorry, the puppy's in my way. I've always been politically inclined and, very passionate about the topic. And, I looked sort of the field of candidates, and I wasn't finding inspiration really from any of them. Like I thought Biden, he's a nice guy, but does he really represent a possible, win? And ultimately I'm thinking to myself, like, what type of candidate could do well against the Donald Trump? And then all of a sudden this Andrew Yang guy comes about. And every time he says something, I'm like, well, that makes sense. That's logical, and that makes sense. And I think you see that on the debate stage when he gets up there, he says something, and all the other candidates look at him and go, "Yeah, I guess so." Like nobody goes, "You're wrong." They just go, "Duh, I guess. Yeah, I guess you're right." So practical, logical, reasonable as well. Like I really appreciate how much he was willing to actually send a message to all of America, right? Including people who are Trump supporters. I know so many people who are Trump supporters who would say things like, I would never vote for a Democrat other than that John Yang guy, right?
We'll take it.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I really believe his humanity first message and the idea of uniting the country, I think it's important because I think we're in a dangerous place, with the rhetoric that's happening on both sides now and the extremes. And I think Yang was a voice of reason. So more and more I listened to his message, and the UBI, I read his book, and democracy dollars. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Social credits, that makes sense. All right. All this stuff is awesome. It's, it's unique. And I feel like Yang looks at politics from a perspective of like, what's to come for this country rather than, governing like a country that looks like 1965, which it no longer does.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I think even with Biden and to some extent Bloomberg, I feel like their campaign is all about, well, I'm just going to reset and maybe take us back to, 2008, 2009 or 10. But I think Yang's trying to figure out, well, what do we need to do for 2028 or 2038?
We talk about climate change and everything, that's obviously a hot button issue for those on the left. And, we look at it and say like, well, in a lot of cases, some of the things are a little bit too late. And Yang mentions this. When it comes to automation and artificial intelligence, as he mentions consistently, my concern is by the time people are aware of how big of a problem this is, it becomes a little bit too late, right?
Yeah.
But Yang is somebody that has foresight, and I think he sees the problems of tomorrow. And I hope that, he resonated enough with the other candidates to make that part of their platform to see like, okay, well, listen, we're not going to stop AI. We're not stopping automation. There's a lot of benefits to society, but there's also an issue of, okay, what do we do when the robots are doing everything? Like, how are we going to live?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Now, what has it been like advocating for him in Nevada? Like, what are your friends and sort of the other folks that you talk to? Like, what's the reaction when you tell people that, oh yeah, I'm supporting this guy?
Well, that's been the coolest part with Andrew Yang. In the past, obviously, we had Hillary versus Trump, and she was a very polarizing figure herself. So if you were supporting her, people would come at you with knives. When, as a supporter of Andrew Yang, nobody hates him that I know. They're all like, they may think he lives in fantasy land. It's like, oh yeah, sure, give everybody $1,000, or they may disagree or not understand the depth of it. But I found that specifically with Andrew Yang, more so than any other candidate, people on all sides of the political spectrum are willing to have civil discourse and discussion about, the policies he's putting forth and the ideals he has for the country. It's very respectful. And I think a part of that is because of the man that he is, and he has handled his entire campaign in a very respectful manner, not calling out people in spots where he, maybe could have. Maybe should have.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, do you feel like he could have played a little bit more aggressively, if you will? Like, I mean, I agree. Everyone seemed to like him, and he got along with everybody on stage, in terms of the field. But I wonder if like that kind of, limited his success a little bit if he didn't draw sharp enough contrasts, as they say.
Yeah. So, he's a lot of people's second pick, right? And like, well, we want to be your first pick, right? Which he brings up another point that ranked voting would work. But specifically in the debates, like if you look at all the debates, he had the lowest amount of talking time. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, he's very concise and says what he means in a, shorter amount. Like Joe Biden tells a story and he's like, well, corn pop on the corner there. I said, okay, where are you at now? You're all over the place. So he's very concise. The other thing that I felt like he did was he never got involved in any one-on-one rebuttals. And I think, unfortunately, this is the theatrics of debate. You have to sort of look at a plan. So, for example, you say, here's the problem with your plan here, Miss Warren. It doesn't cover X, Y, and Z. Here's why my plan does. And now, when you do that, the moderators go for, they go back to Warren to rebut, and then you get a chance to rebut. So you create a little bit of a one-on-one, which allows you to have a little bit more time. I get the sense that, he didn't really want to be antagonistic in that way, but I think it's important, as you said, from a contrast perspective, because I think a lot of people who didn't know enough about Yang just thought like his only platform was the UBI. And
Right.
like, not at all true. Like, go to his website. He's got, opinions on hundreds of policies. But for a lot of people, I don't think that they fully got it. And listen, he's new. He didn't have any name recognition whatsoever going into this. And we know that's a thing. That's an important thing. So he's setting himself up for, potentially a future in 2024. Who knows?
Yeah, it's a shame about that debate format, because I remember in the early days, he was not professionally, but he was academically trained in traditional kind of high school and college debates, which obviously are very different from the format that we have like on network TV for politicians. And I've heard this before, actually, about the Obama campaign, where folks that are very cerebral, that speak in paragraphs and actually want to answer the question in like a structured way, like that is not the way you win a debate. There's a whole nother skill set. And I worry, like, wow, do we have a system here that rewards performers, like, frankly, like Trump, right? Who people thought would do terrible in debates, but he actually did pretty good. And maybe that doesn't really translate to being in the Oval Office and making hard decisions. But that's the system we have.
Absolutely right. It is. And I thought, Andrew, in his first debate, mentioning that we're a bunch of reality stars on here with makeup on our face was a really great point that resonated with a lot of people. Now, if you contrast Andrew Yang the night before in the town hall, where he had an hour on CNN, he crushed it. He absolutely crushed it. People were all about it. He was in his element, so clear. I think on the next night, when you saw the debate, he seemed a little bit nervous. Didn't seem to have his A game for that, that last debate there. But you're right in that, debates are all about memorable viral moments. The one moment where, historically where, the whole, I knew Jack Kennedy, you're no Jack Kennedy, right? Or, Ronald Reagan saying, I will not use his youth and inexperience to make it, stuff like that, really resonates. Andrew Yang had his moments early on with specifically that, discussion about them being reality star actors, but finding a way to, it's very difficult in a debate. You get 30 to 60 seconds to explain a plan for how you're going to tackle healthcare. I mean, what? You can only, gloss on it. You can't get into real depth. And you're right. Trump is a master at speaking at a fourth grade level that is understandable to all Americans, obviously. And they interpret that as, he tells it like it is. He speaks. So they mistake truth with the idea that he's speaking in such a way that's so raw and rare that, everyone understands it. Whereas someone a little more educated, like when, some of the things that, Yang might be talking about might be too high level for the average person to even know where he's at, but I think we need to have that conversation. Just the debate stage might not be the best place for it.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, you compare how he does, to your point, in town halls, or even more extreme in long form podcasts. I mean, that guy was made for that format. And you could argue, like, what would Trump be like on a 1 hour podcast? Like, he'd probably end up in jail if he talked for that long, right?
He can't. Like, if you what's great about Trump, if you actually ever read, like, you hear what he says and he talks all, if you read a transcript of something he says, you're like, what in the world is happening right now? None of this makes any sense. But he's created a world where the rules are different for him. He has his niche, he has his supporters that stick with him through and through. But I was actually really encouraged to see that Yang was able to sort of come at them, not mocking them and demeaning them and putting them down, but instead saying, you've been sold the idea that immigration is the cause of your problems, where it's actually automation and artificial intelligence that are costing you jobs. And I remember hearing some Trump supporters actually have that light bulb go off for them, and realize that they've been lied to. So I think he did a great job of reaching out to people that much of the party at this point just completely neglects and just figures, okay, they're a write-off. And they might be right, but I still feel like if you're going to be president, you have to be president for all Americans.
Totally. Well, Daniel, how did you get connected? So you decide to support the campaign, and now you're putting on an event tomorrow. So what was that like? What was your engagement like with the campaign? What was it like, coordinating with them? Like, how was your journey from, I like this guy, to I'm actually going to go and try and do stuff for this guy now?
it's really cool the world we live in now in some ways with social media, right? Because like I just tweeted out my support for Yang here and there, and then I had people from the campaign. I had Andrew Yang himself reach out, via Twitter and send me a DM and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so then I created a relationship with their campaign manager, and just been discussing this event with some local people here who are pro Yang, and it just sort of evolved and developed from there. So I'm curious and interested to see, like, we're going to have a meeting with them on Thursday and sort of like maybe get a sense of their plan and how I can support and help. Because like I said, I really don't feel like the Yang Gang movement is anywhere close to over. It's just the beginning. It was really cool to see. If you look online specifically, there wasn't a more passionate group, right?
Yeah.
The Yang Gangers are like diehard, man. They don't mess around, and they're well educated, and they know how to have these civil debates and discussions. And I was proud to be associated with Yang Gang. And I can't say that would be true necessarily of some of, the supporters of other candidates who, just go below the belt.
Yeah, no, I've seen that, and I tend to agree with you that I find that the Yang Gang, I mean, if you are into data-driven, logical, well-reasoned arguments, then you're less likely to be like always like taking personal shots at people. And it's a little bit of I have to admit, I'm a little still, mourning the outcome. I knew that it was improbable that we would get to the White House, but I for some reason I thought we would make it through Super Tuesday and then make a decision. Were you surprised, or how did you read
No,
that?
I think that like the plan was, Iowa, New Hampshire, to get to Nevada, you needed like somewhere in the neighborhood of a 4th or a 5th place in terms of, support. And, he fell short of that in both spots. So I just felt like, I really respect and admire the fact that Yang didn't want to continue the campaign and continue to raise money if he genuinely believed there wasn't a path, right? Because there's so much money that people take out of their pocket to help a cause or support a candidate. And if you know in your heart that, it's not going to happen on this cycle, then, it's the respectful and honorable thing to do is say, no, hang on to it. Like, I'll let you know when we're raising for the next one. But for now, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like he could have taken the path of least resistance, which would have been, let's just keep going.
Sure.
We're probably, I'm sure the Yang Gang would have chipped in and kept trying to fund the campaign. But I guess to your point, he quite looked at the cards on the table and said that this is not likely going to happen. And why should I keep expending people's energy and capital and resources?
Yeah. To his credit, real quick. Yeah. Sorry. The event tomorrow night was supposed to be somewhat of a fundraiser as well. Well, he's still coming, he's still honoring the commitment, but obviously it's no longer going to be a fundraiser since the campaign is no longer viable. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. I wonder if also part of the equation, this is pure speculation, but I wonder if part of the equation is, well, I'm gonna keep a little powder dry because I've got a longer term. I've got other things I want to work on to help the country, and whether it's a campaign for a different office or if it's setting up like an organization that helps grassroots UBI candidates. I've heard of all kinds of ideas of people thinking like, oh, well, what will he do? So maybe he's playing the long game saying, well, I want to be respectful of people's time and energy. And when I want to make my next move, I want them to be, to know that I'm ready to go. And, maybe Nevada wasn't the optimal next move, I suppose.
Yeah, no question. There's a lot of options on the table. I think any candidate, will look at the base that Yang created, his ability to really use the internet in a way that, like, as he says, better than Trump. He's like, I'm better at the internet than Trump. I think that's going to be a valued asset within the party. So I definitely see that he's going to have a lot of options on the table, whether he chooses to take one up, whether it's a cabinet or a running mate or, even creating a new cabinet position for someone like him, because there's really nobody in government. There is no area that they cover. What are we going to do about automation and artificial intelligence? And I think that, he could play a role there, or he could start, moving towards 2024. I think it's a pretty cool spot for him. One chapter's closed, but it opens up so many new possibilities, and I'm excited to see, where that takes him.
Yeah, it's great that he's a pretty young guy. I mean, he's not like he's in his 70s, and this is the final shot at the White House. He's got some time. and he certainly has a movement, and he can bring stuff to the table, whoever the nominee will be, that I think will has earned him some leverage there, frankly. With
Yeah, no
whoever gets
question.
the
I
nomination,
think that if I were him and I was
Yeah.
advising him, I would hold off on supporting or nominate,
Mhm.
letting my support too quickly. There's no rush, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot that needs to be flushed out in the next few weeks. And I think maybe after Super Tuesday, or maybe even not even, supporting any candidate outside of the one that we elect, right? Because it seems like that would be aligned with kind of Yang's position all along, which was a little bit, it was very kumbaya, right?
Yeah.
So rather than, pick one and then pit that person against the other person, like everyone rally around whoever the eventual nominee will be.
Daniel, someone in the chat was saying, would you ever run for Congress? I just noticed that.
You know
Have you
what?
thought about that?
Listen, I thought about it a few times and then I realized I love my life and I don't really want a job. I love playing poker and things. And that might be something. I'm 45 now. If I'm 65 or 70 and I feel like I have a good pulse of, or an interest in that, maybe, but I doubt it. I really like my life. I love the freedom that it, entails. And, I feel it would depend on what Congress looks like. Cause right now it's broken. Far too many people in Congress, what their job is, they spend 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week raising money. I hate that. Yeah. I hate asking people for money, for anything, making calls, all this kind of stuff. Sounds like the worst existence imaginable. Obviously, I'd love to see complete reform, and term limits and all kinds of stuff. But as is, what is the Congress doing? Raising money? No thanks. I don't want that job. Nope.
Well, if they had democracy dollars, it would be a different story, right? It's so sad because I know so many other people who are very successful in their profession and their career. And then you ask them oh, would you ever go to DC and do your part as a public servant? And, it's not a great deal because then people are well, why would I do that? I'm going to have to raise money half the time. I'm going to be dragged through this media circus. Yep. It's going to be super disruptive to my family. And then, by the way, I may not even be able to get anything done because it's so broken.
Doesn't it suck that rarely, and this is what I thought was so interesting, rarely do you see candidates that are the people that you'd want to see run the country, they don't want the job.
That's right.
Andrew Yang to me represented that guy where you look at him, you look at the package of who he is and what he does with his life. And it's he's the kind of guy I'm thinking to myself, I'd love a president like that. Yeah. But, typically those types of people don't want the job, and Andrew Yang did. So I was absolutely going to support that. It's not an easy job, right? You get into politics, it's dirty, it's ugly, when you're dealing with, them slamming you. It's so funny. I read this little piece in the New York Times about Andrew Yang. It was supposed to be this big hit piece. And part of me was excited because I'm oh, wow, they're starting to
they're covering him.
They're going after him. That's good.
And
I read the piece and it was so lame. It was essentially most people saying he's a great boss. A couple people, maybe two, said maybe that, he wasn't, or that he said things in a way that they didn't like. It's really? We're using this compared to what else is out there. I was if that's the best you got on Yang, then I think he's got a, pretty good future.
Yeah, that was the big bombshell. His campaign's going to be over after they run this story piece, and you're that's not that bad actually.
Yeah, I'm reading the second half and people saying I loved him, he was a great boss. I'm okay, this is a pretty bad hit piece if that's what you're trying to do.
I think he high-fived too much was another concern.
He high-fived, or he made fun of himself.
Yeah,
this one was really unique. It's this is when racism got amok when he himself, an Asian man.
Right.
And make fun of the fact that he's, an Asian who likes math. If he's not allowed to do that, what world are you trying to create? Is he racist against himself? Is he contributing to, it's we have to be careful, I think, in this society now of going too far with that stuff. And I think Andrew Yang rode the line really well, where he had a sense of humor, maintained one, was willing to be self-deprecating and funny. And I think that, that's important. We can't be offended by everything. Cancel culture is dangerous. It genuinely is. And it alienates. It alienates moderates. It alienates people, anywhere in the middle. If you want to, you want support for a movement, you can't make everyone evil and turn them into villains because of something they may have said 10 years ago.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think he came across as during the campaign as someone who was just very reasonable, very practical, and those aren't words I would use to describe, the other candidates in the field. Like you were talking about how a lot of people that you want to run for office, like they won't. Do you remember the movie Gladiator?
Of course.
So do you remember when the emperor says to Maximus, like, oh, you have to do this. Don't you want this job? And he's like, no, I don't. And he's like, that's why it has to be you.
Yes, exactly. Right.
And I feel like Yang is like Maximus, and the emperor's son is like one who's been dreaming of being emperor all his life. And that's not the kind of candidate that I want to support, because it's like, well, why are you in, like, why do you want to do this? Is it for you? Is it to kind of like, kind of put something on your resume, or do you really want to serve?
Well, if we look at Trump, for example, he's the perfect example of a guy who, what was his main objective for wanting to be president? Was it to really make the country better, or was it about being more famous? And if you look through his career, there's plenty of evidence that it's always been about fame. Whether it was, the cameo in Home Alone that he wanted to be in, or whether it was like something that he said many years ago. I remember in an interview, he said, this was when he, maybe in the 70s, 80s or something, he said he had a rich friend who was a billionaire, went to a restaurant and couldn't get a reservation. So he called Donald Trump. Donald got him in. And he said this, he said, what's the point of having all that money if nobody knows who you are? So it's like, it's really a testament to, it really being about all about him. Now, listen, narcissistic qualities are going to run rampant for the most part within people that genuinely believe that they are qualified to lead 300 million people. Like, you could argue that anyone who takes that on, has a high opinion of themselves, right?
Yep.
Obviously, like, who are you to be that guy, right? Like, really?
Yeah.
You think you can lead the entire nation? But yeah, that's why the people that you like that don't have those qualities rarely would see themselves as being the one person out of 300 million that should be president.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the rest of the field, Daniel? Like, a lot of people are talking about, well, who do they support now? Some people are saying, I'm going to write in Yang. Some people are saying, I'm just not going to participate at all. Other people are saying, hey, we still have to find someone to compete with Trump. Well, where are you at on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people from the Bernie camp are trying to connect Yang to Bernie. And I remember doing that Washington Post poll where, you see which candidates align with you.
Right.
Out of 20 questions, 15 for Yang. My lowest of that was 3 for Bernie Sanders. So the idea that they're similar, I don't buy. Like, I don't think that they have very similar views. I think, for one, Andrew Yang has a specific plan how he was going to play for the UBI. When you ask Bernie how he plans to cut Medicare, give Medicare for all, also cut all student debt, and the list of things that he does. When asked for how much it would cost, he doesn't know that. If you don't know how much it costs, then how do you know how you're going to pay for it, and who's paying for it, and how is this all going to happen? So when it comes to, he's a populist for sure, and he gets a lot of people excited. My concern is it's a lot of fluff, but like, where's the substance? He's been in politics for 30 some odd years as a senator, in Congress, and like, what has he really been able to accomplish there? People say they don't want an establishment candidate, but like, isn't he kind of the definition? He's been a politician for 30 something years. He's also a millionaire. So I'm not sure that, well, Bernie's certainly not somebody that I'm aligned with. I feel like the contrast is interesting between Bernie and Trump, of course.
I think some people would argue that Bernie and Yang both are focused on the same problem, which is sort of like the impact on the working man and the people who don't have a lot of resources. But for sure, the way they want to approach it and how they solve the problem is very different. Yeah.
My biggest concern with with Bernie, and this really hits home with me. I'm not a billionaire. I've done well in my life, but like, the rhetoric and the way in which he speaks about people who've accumulated wealth in this country or live the American dream, such a negative tone, as though, it creates a sort of a mob mentality of like putting people like Oprah, who's a billionaire, on a stake and thinking they're the evil enemy. Like, the idea, and I tweeted this and I was surprised I got so much backlash from this. And I said, an upsetting trend that I'm seeing is the vilification of billionaires who choose to spend their own money rather than asking people to fund their own campaigns, right? Like, to just assume that they have, evil intent. Now, Michael Bloomberg is obviously an example of someone like that, fits the mold I'm discussing. But like, and I'm not saying whether he's a good candidate or not, but I'm specifically saying like the way the system is set up now is it's broken. Don't blame the people like Bloomberg who are, using the system and the rules in which, give him an opportunity to be a part of it. He's not the problem. And making billionaires the enemy or people of wealth the enemy, it's just a class warfare game that I just don't think serves them well. It just creates a lot of anger. We have a lot of Trumpers who are angry and have been angry for a long time. And I get that same feeling from Bernie supporters that are very, very angry. And, they're angry at a different group of people, I guess.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Bloomberg in that I'm a little bit torn on this one because as a former Republican, I have a lot of respect for people who've been successful leading businesses, who are traditional, like pre-Tea Party Republicans, like very by the book. They know the economics, they know the finance, they run the numbers. So I respect that. I also respect that he's has taken very strong positions on climate change and gun safety. And a lot of the things that we talk about now, like obesity, he talks about. So great record in as a mayor and as a CEO. So like a lot to like. But at the same time, it does worry me that we are potentially going to have two billionaires, or at least one billionaire and one who claims to be a billionaire, running against each other. And the fact that Bloomberg dropped like 300 million already.
5.
Maybe, yeah. So maybe even more than that. And you're like, well, shoot, if Andrew Yang had those kinds of resources, I suspect he would have been more than 3% in New Hampshire. And part of Bloomberg's electability is the fact that he has this war chest. So part of me feels like from a fairness point of view, like, I don't want to support it. But on the other hand, from a, like, you got to play the game as it's written. So might as well win it. Yeah. Like, I feel like, okay, well, maybe we can't fault him because he's going to potentially be a very credible candidate against Trump. Where do you land with them? No,
you make so many great points there that I want to dive into. But most importantly, like what I'm looking for, what I think is important is winning, right? Winning. Republicans are willing to win at all costs. Voter suppression, gerrymandering, they're very, very good at this sort of thing, right? So, when Michael Bloomberg was asked the question, he's like, well, how do you feel about two billionaires going back and forth on Twitter? And he's like, two, who's the other one? Right? Because there's no evidence that Trump is a billionaire. Absolutely zero. We know that Bloomberg is. My point, I guess, with Bloomberg is like, it shouldn't be seen as he shouldn't be disqualified because he has wealth that can fund his own campaign. Right. Obviously, I'd love to see all money get out of politics in such a way with democracy dollars where you can't donate money. You're not allowed to donate money. All you're allowed to do is donate democracy dollars. And that's why Yang's proposal is what it is. Having said that, currently, money is a part of the game. Bernie has a PAC. A lot of these people are raising money from everyday Americans. I don't fault a man who's accumulated wealth in his life to choose to use that wealth to do what he thinks is right. If he believes that, he's the right candidate that can beat Trump and he's spending his own money. Like, I find it just odd that people like, are just condemn that. Like he's not cheating the rules. He's not doing anything. He studied the strategy and he's actually looking at like, what is the best way to win? We need more Democrats looking at like, forget about kumbaya for a minute. Like, how do we win? Like actually win. And, if that's the strategy that he's using to do that, I just don't get why people can condemn that.
So do you have a short list? Like, where are you leaning now?
Well, again, like who, and I realized this, it's funny. It was a little bit of a self-growth moment. When I first saw Amy Klobuchar come onto the scene, I realized like her voice annoyed me, which is so sexist and so stupid. Well, we all have these tendencies, whether we like to admit it or not. We have these views. And I'm like, would I ever said that if it was a man, that she has a naggy, whiny voice? No, I would have never said that. So when I did that poll, she actually ranked second on my list at 13. And I think she did quite well in the last debate. But I'm more towards, I guess I would consider myself more moderate than far left. So, I would rank someone like, Bloomberg, Mayor Pete, Amy Klobuchar, in the higher end, Biden, nice enough guy, reasonable in the middle there. And then at the bottom, I've got, for me, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. I just feel like they shoot themselves in the foot, and in a general election, they'll get destroyed. If I worked for Trump, I could write the ads myself, paint them as not only socialists. You could actually you could paint them as communists, and people will buy that. And some of the things that Bernie says sound like that. When he says billionaires should not exist, that sounds like a very, communist ideology to say that they shouldn't even exist. So you're essentially saying you should cap people's wealth. You're telling Americans that the government should say how much money you can and can't have. Doesn't that sound like communism?
Yeah, I mean, you'll for sure expect that Bernie or Warren will be labeled as anti-business, anti-job creation, trying to use government to solve all your problems. And I imagine I think that would be an effective line of attack. And a lot of people who believe in the free market and competition will
they're going to hit Bernie on that. They're going to hit Bernie. They're going to use Venezuela always, right, as an example of what socialism looks like. And they're going to use it as this dark dystopian thing. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to talk about immigration. And Bernie is going to get crushed on immigration because Bernie essentially stands for absolutely open borders where people, will be able to come here illegally, stay, and get free Medicare and free healthcare. That's not going to play well in a general election. Any moderates or libertarians or whatever are going to hear that, they're going to run for the hills. So, right now, Bernie seems to be doing quite well, in the left progressive faction of the party. But what happens when you have to pivot back to the general? I feel like there's far too many people I know that will vote Democrat this upcoming election, except not for Bernie. They would actually genuinely vote for Trump, which that's a scary, realization to come to.
Yeah, I mean, did you hear? I think this is true that Bernie may have honeymooned or spent a trip to the Soviet Union. Have you heard that?
I did not hear that. No.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm guessing that will come up in ads.
Yeah, it seems like a weird place to honeymoon.
It's maybe it was in the summer. I don't know.
The one thing I think, so if I'm thinking about the candidate that can win, right? I'm just trying to picture that one of the ones that we have for us. I think that, Mayor Pete has somewhat of a case, but also Bloomberg can fight back against this faux billionaire because he's richer, more successful, and I think that's sort of what a lot of Trumpers loved about Trump. They think he's this, great successful hero, which there's no evidence of, as I said, but he could battle him on that front. Ultimately, I think really at this point, the only chance the Democratic Party has is if we see legitimate economic collapse to a certain degree in the next few months, because people will ultimately vote. They say it's the economy, stupid. And the economy is perceived to be doing well right now, right? So if that's true, would people be willing to take on a radically new view of how to move the economy in a new direction? They won't, right? Now, I obviously understand, like you do and everyone, that Trump is mortgaging our future. And then, he's paying, he's creating a sort of a fake, great economy that will suffer in the future. But for most Americans, they don't, for many Americans, they don't see it that way. And taking the country in a completely new direction when the economy is perceived to be good, I don't see it happening.
All right. Well, Daniel, I want to talk about the other moderate candidates, and then we're going to take some questions for a little bit. So when you mentioned that you are shortlisting Klobuchar, Mayor Pete, and Biden, right?
And Bloomberg.
Oh, and Bloomberg, right.
Yeah,
okay, so we talked about Bloomberg. Let's talk about Buttigieg. He's done really well in Iowa and New Hampshire. He's very articulate, very intelligent, highly educated, not from DC, not dyed in the wool establishment. What are your thoughts about him? Why not just go straight to him?
He's high on my list, as I said. I feel like, all the things you mentioned are true. The package sounds good. I believe that, I don't know enough about where he actually genuinely stands on policy ideas. And I haven't heard anything fresh or new or unique, something like a UBI that comes from Yang that is all that different. I have other concerns about him in terms of electability, because I think Trump could, create a sort of, so this would be ironic, but Trump would create family values ads against Mayor Pete. And he's going to have Mayor Pete in a gay club wearing leather chaps, right? With like a bunch of men around him. Like we saw the video, I imagine most of you have, where there was a supporter at the caucus who supported Pete. and then said, I want my vote back, finding out that he has a same-sex partner.
Mhm.
Oddly enough, both of my assistants that work for me are both they're both LGBTQ. They're both
Mhm.
gay. And they have some concerns. I don't know that they trust him. They can't pinpoint why, but there's something about a politician that's so polished and so well-spoken in certain ways that people are, thrown off by. I'm not so sure about him yet. Like, I'm going to obviously do my research now that, Yang is, taking a step aside, but I think he's definitely performed well in debates. And, he's a good moderate alternative to Biden, who I feel like is just slipping. Like, he had a really poor showing in Iowa and New Hampshire, and I don't see a recovery big enough to have Biden as being the nominee.
Yeah, for me with Buttigieg, I have a concern, I think, that I share with your assistants around authenticity and sincerity. And I think that matters to me because I know that I'm not going to be able to look over their shoulder when they're in the White House. So I need to know that they're going to make the right decision for the country. And I really want to know what their motivation and worldview is. And I don't want to hear what they think I want to hear. I want to hear what they really believe. And with Pete, it just, I don't know. Sometimes he comes off a little too smooth, too scripted. It seems almost too good to be true, but then who knows? I mean,
and you'd also have to have some concerns about him being compromised. He's the only non-millionaire, on the stage that's running. So, he is taking in money from wealthy people who, maybe are aligned with the views. And when you do that, often you feel some pressure when you are in the White House to, give back favors. And, you definitely, that's going to be an argument that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren will make towards him. My gay assistant, who's very politically inclined and has been gay for a very long time, his whole life, he's 55 years old. He has concerns about that aspect of Mayor Pete in terms of him being, newly out. He's been closeted for most of his life, and a belief within the community that there's an experience and there's sort of an exploration process when someone is newly out that they have to go through, that they don't really know themselves yet, or whatever the case may be. I can't eloquently state it as well as he did, but that's also a concern that he has, and I would have expected that he would be seeing that as an asset, the fact that he's like a gay candidate who represents him and his views, but he hasn't. Yeah, it hasn't really hit home for him in that way.
Yeah. Well, what about Klobuchar? I had an aha moment, I think, at the New Hampshire debate, where I always kind of dismissed her as, well, not a top tier candidate. And then, a couple of her answers, I was like, oh, she maybe literally the early debate, she was kind of literally shaky or had these kind of weird jokes that didn't really land well. But I thought lately she's really finding kind of her rhythm. I guess the question is, like, I still am not sure how she would stack up in a head-to-head matchup with Trump, though. Is she a fighter? Like, how will she do with him kind of brawling?
Well, just the way in which she's been able to, be a part of the debates. Like, there was a point where her and Yang were probably pretty close. And then there was a debate where she really took the stage and kind of got involved in the conversation and showed some of that fight, in a real way. So, I mean, again, with her, I don't, I feel like, again, as I said, before, originally it was maybe a little bit of a sexist thing because of her voice was naggy, which is really, really stupid and not a reason. But she's definitely going to be another, player in the race. She's got success. She's beaten Republicans before, as her and Warren have mentioned in the past. She has some experience, but I don't know yet if does she have a following that can grow to the level we need to match that of Trump. And what skeletons are in it, we don't know yet. It's just so early in the process in terms of vetting a lot of these candidates that who knows? But I'm not opposed to seeing her as the candidate. That's for sure.
Like, here's a litmus test, and then we'll go to questions. A litmus test is, if you imagine that you have the ability to pick the nominee yourself, and you're just trying to figure out who has the best chance of beating Trump. And I say to you, Daniel, look, we've got Amy Klobuchar ready to go. We've got Pete Buttigieg ready to go. And we got Mike Bloomberg ready to go. Who do you want to put in the ring with Donald J. Trump? For me, I go straight to Bloomberg.
Bloomberg, yeah, by a long shot. Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had any choice, I would say Oprah and Michelle. like, like let's just absolutely destroy them, right? Because that sells. But I definitely think like of all those, Bloomberg is the one guy that I think Bloomberg. And again, like a lot of people look at this as a negative that he's been a Republican, that he's supported policies on both sides. I don't know that that's necessarily something that you'd look at as a negative. It is to those on the far left. It is to Bernie supporters. They're not going to like a candidate like Bloomberg. The question is, what will they do this time around? If Bernie is not the candidate, will those supporters choose to stay home, vote for Bloomberg, or just, do a spite vote for Trump? And, I think in the last election, we saw obviously a lot of disappointed Bernie supporters when Hillary won. A lot of them didn't turn out. A lot of them turned the other way. Hopefully, whatever happens, that they see that, like in some cases, like, I look at it this way myself. Obviously, my number one choice is Andrew Yang. He's not going to be the candidate. So now I'm going to, if I have to pick the lesser of two evils, then I do that. Like you must make that choice. People saying, well, all the candidates suck. Well, which one sucks the least for you, right? Let's look at that. Which one has the best chance to beat the one that you really don't want? And then, you go with them. You don't have to do it passionately or pretend that they represent your values, but you still, I think it's, your duty to kind of do what's best for the nation.
I mean, there's plenty of hands where the guy that wins the pot doesn't have the most beautiful hand. It's just the least crappy one. and that's kind of, I feel like, you wanted Yang. I did too. He was like the ace king. You're not going to get it. Sometimes you just got to play the one that's going to win the pot though. And that might be Bloomberg. What about
he definitely has the
Bloomberg
resources. Yeah. What
do you think of a Bloomberg Yang combination?
So my only concern with the Bloomberg Yang combination is that they sort of represent mostly the same base of people. And I think typically when you build a ticket, you're looking to broaden that base, right? Because they're very similar type candidates, I would think, in terms of where they stand. So I would think having somebody maybe that does represent the views of the far left, because for a guy like Bloomberg, someone that's like Bernie supporter approved might be worthwhile for him. I don't know that Yang would be the ideal running mate for Bloomberg, but he, obviously I would think someone like a Bernie would love to have a Yang, or, Mayor Pete, could use someone like Yang and that sort of passion. But I'm not so sure that there's like a perfect fit as VP. And I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense for Yang to even go down that road right now. Instead, more so just looking at a cabinet position where he can do his thing. He can just really like continue to promote his message and, get stuff done at a government level.
All right. Well, we are going to start to take questions, Daniel, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
The first question actually comes from Bruce, who is the person who connected us on Twitter when he said, "Oh, hey, Daniel, you should come on the Nerds for Yang show." And then you're like, "Sure, whatever." So Bruce was the one that started that. So thank you, Bruce. What do you think about UBI and its effect on poker?
Well, obviously, when you think about more people having, buying power or have cash in their hands, they're going to choose some of that on entertainment dollars. Whether it's going to movies, whether it's, taking their kids out to dinners and things like that a little bit more, or maybe it's playing a little more poker. So obviously, giving everyone a little bit of a bankroll. But I want to make it clear that like before I knew that Yang had a position on online poker or anything like that, my support for him had nothing to do with any of this. Like, it's not like, oh, this will be good for poker. Sure, I'd like to see poker thrive and flourish, but, I'm not going to support a candidate based on his thoughts on, ace king, right? But no, obviously, I think overall the UBI would be beneficial to the economy, right? So when the economy works and is flourishing, so does the poker boom. Like more people are playing and more people have disposable income that they can choose to spend as they wish. And I think that's an important part of the UBI that a lot of people miss out on is the UBI essentially puts the power in the people's hands of saying, here's the money, you decide what's best for you in terms of how you spend it. Rather than government saying, well, we're going to buy you this, and we're going to buy you this, and we're going to give you this for that and that. I'm like, no, how about give me the money, let me decide for myself. And sure, there are going to be people who misuse that money, right? That's going to be a case, but we don't govern or we don't make legislation based on the 5 or 10% of people that, may not use it responsibly.
Yeah. Totally agree. I mean, just curious with regards. I know Yang has said he supported online poker as a full-time professional poker player. Are you pro online poker, or do you feel like you would rather have it stay in like the casinos and sort of professional
No.
establishments? No.
Absolutely pro online poker. I mean, I'm with GG Poker, which is a company
there
that
you
is
go.
online poker. I was like, so yeah, no, obviously I'm a big proponent of online poker. I'm a big proponent of the freedom for people to choose. Okay.
Right.
If you want to play poker on the internet in your underwear for $5 or $10, I don't believe the government should step in and say, no, we're going to protect you from yourself.
Mhm.
You're not allowed to play. It's kind of, it's an absurd notion. I've always been a classic liberal in a lot of these ways. I think marijuana, if people want to smoke it, I don't. You should have every right to. Studies have shown it's less dangerous than alcohol, but somehow alcohol is legal, right?
Mhm.
So I'm for giving people the opportunity to choose how they want to spend their money. And if, part of that is poker, I'm not morally opposed to gambling. Like, I don't have a problem with it in the casino. So why would I have a problem with people choosing to have some fun on a Sunday and, play some tournaments online?
Right on. Star has a question of, do you think Yang would make a difference as a Secretary of Labor? Like, do you think there's a specific cabinet role that would be best suited for him? Or,
well, the thing about Yang that's so interesting and so unique is he's a candidate like we've never seen before, talking about issues no one's ever talked about before, right?
Mhm.
So I think you can create a role for him, a czar of sorts of automation and artificial intelligence, where he doesn't necessarily have to fit into any sort of traditional roles that you would see in a cabinet. Like, his addition to any sort of administration could be in a new created role that essentially he could take the lead on, because anyone who takes him on as a leader would have to know, like, Yang knows more about this stuff than I do, so run with it. You tell me what makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's a bit of a utility player. Like, you could see him in a lot of roles being effective, and certainly a czar around technology strategy, or leading the charge on, if anybody wanted to do some pilots around basic income, would be incredible. Let's hope the nominee and the future president seriously considers Andrew for those kinds of things. The next question is from Alex. So you win, you have a great night and you're about to cash out. And then the cage says, okay, yeah, here's your money. And then they keep, 5 to 10% of it. And they're like, well, this is for value added tax. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't put it on the player, right? So the casinos have an advantage whenever they offer, games, right? So the tax should be on the casino because they're the ones actually making money. Like the other people are like, you're losing money. Obviously in poker that's different because you're playing against other people. But even then, the house or the organization who runs the event, they withhold money. They take money out of the prize pool. So that money should and could be taxed. But in terms of like a VAT tax on having a winning poker session,
let me ask you differently then. What if the rate was increased, or the amount that they take out of the prize pool for the tournament was increased, and they're like, sorry, we have to do this because of that now. And so now their take is a little more.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm a big believer in free market, right? So like I offer a product. If you think it's too much, don't play. So if I'm running a tournament and I say, I'm charging 10%, 20% rake, and you think that's too much, then you won't play, right? So people stop showing up, and they just wouldn't, that wouldn't work. I don't know that it would make a lot of sense to add more at this point to tournaments and stuff like that, because the take is already pretty significant across the board. Most places take between 8 to 10% of the entire prize pool. I think the operator itself should take some of that piece, and they already do, and use that to pay tax on that. But I don't think of that. That is mostly, the way I see it, it would be for purchases, right? I wouldn't necessarily describe playing in a poker tournament as a purchase.
Okay. Here's the next question, and I'll direct it to you as well. So there, Michael's saying, hey, will I continue to do this channel post the election? My plan is to continue doing it because I think my goal is to introduce more data-driven discussions and reasoned debates about interesting, hard problems and if people want to watch it, then that's great. So in a way, I feel like, it kind of sucks that our candidate has suspended his campaign, but his ideas and the movement has not ended. And frankly, Andrew Yang has a long career ahead of him, and I don't think we've seen the last of him. But what are your thoughts, Daniel? Do you feel like what kind of participation do you anticipate for yourself in the campaign going forward?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because tomorrow I am set to meet with the campaign manager and sort of discuss their strategy going forward and, their plans. So I'll have a much more informed answer on that after tomorrow in terms of what role I would be willing to play. But a lot of it's going to depend on what Yang himself wants to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to lend his support to another candidate? Is he going to, as you said, try to help people implement UBI across the country and, in pilot cases and things like that? So I'm really going to look to take their lead, but I'm more than happy to help and support in any way that I can. And if that's as simple as, social media support, then I'm doing that. If it's something more intricate where it's hosting events or contributing, I'm all in. Like I was very, as I said, coming into this cycle, I was looking at the candidates thinking, this, what am I going to do? I'm done. And then, and then Yang came about. I'm like, all right, I'm in. I got my guy. Let's go. So he's still going to be my guy regardless. But eventually at some point, we're going to have to look to somebody else for this cycle and, lend your support there.
Got it. Do you have time for a few more questions, or how are you feeling?
Yeah, I got time.
All right. So Garris wants to know, do you think it's possible to automate away poker dealers? Like the shufflers was a big innovation, but the actual dealer as well?
Yes. There already exist. So it's amazing. Like all these things we talk about, they already exist. There are electronic tables that run in certain parts of the country and across the world. They've never been used for tournaments, but there's no reason why theoretically you couldn't. It's not hard. You just create an entire table. You have like a slot to put money or a credit card. You have buttons, and you're essentially playing similar to what you would be online poker, just in front of people, right? Chips are virtual. The betting is virtual. They already exist. So I don't see that happening anytime soon, because there's kind of an allure of playing with chips and cards. But there's no question that if venues start to see like, wow, I can buy this table that I can keep forever that cost me $3,000 and save me all this kind of money.
Right.
I don't like them. I've played on them. I hate them. Yeah. I like the old school kind of feel, but no question. That's obviously a possibility.
So like, is there felt and is there a pot in the middle, or
it would be no different? It would be no different than like a table shaped as a poker table would, with like a glass top. Kind of like, you remember the arcades you played?
Yeah.
Like the tabletop arcade. So you're playing that, and you'd have your buttons in front. You'd have like a cover where you cover your cards. You can squeeze them, and then you can press the button for raise, bet, call, and and it would be no different than essentially playing online poker, but right at a table.
Yeah, it feels like it doesn't have some of that tactile, the sound of the chip shuffling, the banter with the.
It would not be a popular move. And they really didn't take off. These were developed maybe 5-10 years ago, I want to say, and they really didn't catch on. I mean, they still exist, but they're not taking over.
But those shufflers definitely increase the velocity of games.
Right, but the good news is with a shuffler, the automatic shuffler, which we do have in tournaments, you still need a dealer to pick it out of the shuffler.
Yeah. Here's a question: do you think it would hurt Yang's 2024 campaign if he becomes VP?
Well, if he were the VP, right, and they won. So just say, for example, it's Bloomberg and Yang, and they won. Well, obviously in 2024, Bloomberg would be the one running, so it wouldn't be Yang, right?
Yeah.
So so the question would be, if Yang ran as VP and lost, would that help his campaign going forward? I think yes. I think what he needs at this point, first and foremost, is more exposure, more people knowing who he is, and less MSNBC broadcasts calling him John Yang, right? I mean, I think really important to, get his name out there. And I don't think it would hurt his cause if he was the VP for another candidate and they did not win, because anytime a VP runs, no one blames them. That's not the reason. People don't vote for a ticket typically because of who the VP is. It's very rare that that's the case. I think in Trump's case it did, though, because Mike Pence really pandered to the conservative Christian vote, and that did have a positive impact. That was a smart move on the GOP side.
Yeah, Pence was a perfect example of your point around people picking someone that addresses their weakness, And
Yeah.
with Trump, it was
Right.
clearly with
Like
the
you look
family
at Trump,
values
you're
crowd.
thinking like, this is not a godly man. He's raw
No.
dogging porn stars and got 25 kids by six moms and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But Mike Pence is like, oh yes, he's a good Christian. So if he
Right.
thinks it's okay, then I'm on board. And because I
Right.
think there was some wavering support, because I mean, Trump went into the Liberty Bell and was talking about 2 Corinthians. Like he does never read the Bible. It's a great book. It's like, oh yeah, what's your favorite passage in the Bible? Oh yeah, they're all great. Yeah, they're all fantastic. Have you ever asked for forgiveness of the Lord? No, I would if I ever did anything wrong, but I've never done anything wrong. This is stuff Trump said. I mean, not that it should surprise anyone listening to this.
No, sadly, it's not a surprise. Here's a question that only you can answer. I think you're one of the few people in the world that can answer this. Is like, as a poker player, you've probably bluffed a few times. You probably run the odds. You probably read people a little bit. Do you think there's anything that Yang could have done differently this time or can do in the future, applying some kind of poker principles to running for office?
Well, there's one, and you touched on it very, very early on when we talked about it, and that's a little bit of aggression, right? So Yang is a nice guy. Everybody likes Yang, and that's fine. But that's not how politics works ultimately, right? It gets dirty, it gets ugly. You have to start pointing out specifically what differentiates you from the other candidates. And sometimes what you need to do is you need to go on the aggressive and say, here's why listen, Bernie, you don't have any way to pay for it. You don't know how much it costs. You don't know the math. You don't have the math. I do, and here's why. So that might sound antagonistic. It might sound ugly, and you don't have to be rude about it. But in terms of, once you've once you've sold or not sold, once you've gotten your message out about what your platform stands are, then you need to contrast it against others to show people why it's better and how it'll work. So a little more aggression in that regard in terms of differentiating yourself. And maybe, and again, you can be respectful and, we can be humanity first. It's not rude to say, listen, you're a good man, but your plan's no good. That's just what you got to do in a debate.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to that. I wish that that there was a little bit more aggression in those debates. It's a fine line though, because you don't want to come across as a jerk. Right. Because I remember in the early days, I felt like Gillibrand was the opposite. She was like interjecting constantly, and I didn't think it was like a good look. You
have to be authentic, right?
Yeah.
So for a guy like Trump, that's just who he is. He wasn't acting. He's like, this is my life. This is my go-to. This stuff.
This is how I talk
for me, right? I always mock people. I come up with nicknames. I call them Little Mike. I call them, Sleepy Joe, whatever. Yeah. No nickname for Yang, which is funny because I imagine Yang would not have been if it was Trump versus Yang. I was so looking forward to all the racist stuff that Trump would have done. Yeah. Like he can't help himself. There would have been all kinds of like absurd references,
Oh God.
It would have been fun to watch because I know Yang is a guy who could have handled it. He would have laughed it off. He wouldn't have taken it personal and been saddened by him making jokes about his ethnicity or anything like that. He would have welcomed it, I think. So, but yeah, it's super important to be authentic, and if you are going to be, because it's so obvious when people do it. When Marco Rubio in the last cycle was like, oh, it's like, you got to be more aggressive. And it was just very scripted,
Right.
That's not what you want to be.
Yeah, with Rubio, it was like they had a meeting and they're like, look, the only way you're going to do is you got to go lower than him.
Yeah.
Because nobody's tried that before. And you saw him try it and it didn't work.
And his campaign was over instantly when he did.
Yeah.
Well, because that's the tough part with Trump, because he plays by a different set of rules. Trump can insult you, mock you, do all these things. That's part of who he authentically is. When Rubio started to make one joke about his hands being small and that maybe referencing something else that's small, it was over. People were saying, oh my God, how could he stoop so low? And I'm like, when you look at it objectively, you're like, stoop so low. He stooped to where Trump's already at. You know what I mean? But his campaign was finished because he didn't run as that. So for Andrew Yang, as much as we talk about the aggression factor, we got to be careful that, we're not talking about inauthentic aggression. We're talking about really doing your homework and, breaking down the reasons why your plans work and being at the same time respectful of the person, saying like, listen, Bernie, I know you mean well. And I believe Bernie does. I believe Bernie believes everything that he says is going to be good for the country. I vehemently disagree. It doesn't mean I have to hate the person, dislike them, mock them, or insult them.
All right. A couple more questions, then we'll wrap up. Jennifer, thanks for the super chat. This goes towards the Spanish audio version of the Nerds for Yang videos. Basically, I think she's saying like, hey, do you think this could be an example where Yang doesn't win, but then comes back after an unsuccessful attempt. And I think political history is full of examples of people that like George H.W. Bush, who made an attempt. And of course, Bill Clinton had run for governor before and then didn't make it the first time. So I don't think we'll see the last of Yang. Do you think he would be one of those examples of someone who doesn't make it the first time, but comes back stronger afterwards?
Yeah, no question. I mean, if you look at Biden too, this is his third time running, over the last 50 years or something like that. Yeah, I don't think it has any negative effect or negative. Really what he needed to do was enter the sort of conversation, right? How else could have Andrew Yang, gotten the name recognition that he did? Like, he started off at a zero, essentially, right? Nobody knew who he was. Way behind all the other candidates, way behind in terms of attention from the mainstream. He started to build that. And, if he continues to, spread the positive message and more people start to know who this guy is and start to see him as a realistic alternative, then 2024 is a real possibility. I don't think that, and frankly, the way he ran this campaign, it's a plus. Because everyone has fond memories of what he did. Like, no one looks at this and thinks failure. I mean, if you do, you're not really paying attention. Right? This wasn't a failure. This was a huge success in a message that how many people knew what a UBI was before Andrew Yang came out?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
no, I think it was like 4 or 5% support, and now it's like 52%.
Right. Once you understand the UBI, like, obviously there's still detractors on Twitter, which is like a cesspool, but people not understanding how it's paid for. But once people actually do understand the theory behind a UBI, whether you're on the left or the right, it's a progressive program. It's also a program that libertarians like, and even Republicans would look at this and say, okay, if this led to cutting government waste in programs that we have now, they'd be all for it. So I think it's a win-win for all. It's just a question of educating people.
Yeah, it's also like, I think it also speaks to your point about trusting people to make the right choices for themselves and not assuming that government's going to design an elaborate program for every problem that we can think of. And, so I think there's a lot of libertarians out there that. Sure.
The one big thing that stuck out to me from the book, it's in Yang's book as well, but currently in this country, some people have, are getting aid because they are physically unable to work or something like that, right? So if they were to get better, okay, and no longer get what they're getting, they would go get a job that pays less. So they have no incentive. They're de-incentivized. They wouldn't be able to survive if they went to work versus stay on whatever sort of pension or whatever they're getting in terms of government aid. The UBI is unconditional, right? So you get this $1,000, you get it even if you get a job. That's important, right? It actually promotes self-help and people bettering themselves. People talk about drug and alcohol abuse, and that is a problem. You know what? It's a major problem with people who are in despair. Give people a little bit of a kickstart and a little bit of a chance. They're more likely to seek out, help.
Yeah, no, the current programs in many ways disincentivize people from working more.
Yeah. And
the UBI would be the opposite. And I wanted to wrap with one final question that is kind of philosophical from Akshay. Have you ever bluffed when you know you'll lose?
Really? I mean, I'm trying to think, like, not really, no. No. So, like, that's essentially when I think about it and I break it down. That's like saying, okay, I know I'm going to give away this money and make a mistake. Why would I knowingly do this? I've probably done it, and then after the fact, gone, as soon as I did it, go, man, that was stupid. Why'd you do that? I've maybe allowed emotion to make me make a high risk play that probably wasn't advised, but I wouldn't say that I've ever thought, okay, well, let me just be really stupid and do something really dumb here. Yeah, no.
Right. So you wouldn't try and convince the table that you're super loose, or I guess with you, you kind of have a reputation already. So there's no point in trying to.
Well, I would show them. Yeah, I see. So you're basically talking about a table image and things like that. I'll certainly show people if I bluff, but I'm not doing it solely with the intent of thinking that I'm going to lose. There's going to be spots where I'll bluff and think, man, this probably isn't going to work, but there's a chance it'll work, right? Not absolutely no chance this is going to work. Yeah.
So my final questions for you. If Yang were a poker hand, what would he have been in this campaign? And if he runs again, what do you think he's going to be?
I'm going to go with 10 Jack suited because 10 Jack suited is versatile. 10 Jack suited can make straights. It can make flushes. It can make full houses. It's high cards. You can win with top pair. It's a sexy hand. Everybody loves it. It's bold. It creates a lot of interesting dynamics when you play it. A lot of cool situations come up, new ideas.
Right.
I mean, Jack 10 suited all the way, baby.
And it also, if you're playing against people that have, some nice picture cards, they may feel like they have a much stronger advantage, but that 10 Jack suited can come and bite you.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's logical. It plays well after the flop.
Yes. This is what we want. We want the 10 Jack suited. Yeah. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. I know we said we keep it to 45 minutes. I've gone way over. I'm sorry for everybody who put questions in that we couldn't get to. I know you guys had a lot of questions, but hopefully this won't be the last conversation, Daniel. And for the event that you're doing tomorrow, is there anything people need to know about, like when or where they can go to find information about it?
Right. So it's 6 p.m. at the Mosaic Theater here in Las Vegas. As I said, it's no longer a fundraiser. It'll be like a little bit of a town hall. I'm going to kind of host it. I've got questions for Andrew. And then it'll be poker. We're going to play some poker after that. Some of the people that we'll be playing will be people who have donated to the campaign. So the winner there will get a lesson with yours truly, one-on-one. So it'll be fun. I look at it as kind of a celebration of the campaign. It's what better place to celebrate the end of a campaign than Vegas, baby.
So did you say Mosaic Theater?
The Mosaic Theater. It's right on the Strip. Yeah. I tweeted out some information on it. I'll do that again later today so that people can check my Twitter at Real Kid Poker.
All right. So we've got at Real Kid Poker, and then 6 p.m. at the. Is it still open, or I would imagine that kind of thing might be sold out already? Are you?
Well, they didn't sell tickets. I don't believe. I don't know that people are going to be turned away. But if so, oops. Sorry.
All right, well, tell them Daniel and from the Nerds for Yang show said that you should go.
Yeah.
And Daniel, thank you so much for everything you're doing for the movement, for following through with this event and taking such a positive view. Like you're maybe some of us were hoping for like the big pot right early in the night, but you're playing the long game. And that's what we need to do as a country. So hopefully we'll see more of you and Andrew Yang in the near future.
Yeah, this is not a time to feel defeated. It's a time to feel inspired and work harder for the next one.
All right. I'm going to say goodbye, nerds. If you could say goodbye, nerds, right after, then we'll wrap it up. Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.